transfer situation with Aston Villa and Newcastle is an absolute disgrace. It's an outrage, and every fan of clubs that aren't the big six should be outraged. However, I will say I don't feel sorry for Newcastle and Aston Villa at all, because they helped to bring this on themselves. They've reaped what they've sowed when it comes to Spurs, because I hear them all talking about, oh, it's not fair because Spurs finished 17th 2 seasons in a row and they can outspend us. And listen, I'm going to go on and completely defend Aston Villa and Newcastle shortly. But I cannot ignore the elephant in the room when it comes to the fact that Aston Villa and Newcastle both had a chance to relegate Tottenham last season. They both had a chance. First of all, Aston Villa played Spurs at home towards the end of the season in a game that, if they would have won, Spurs would be relegated. What did they do? They rotated, which I didn't have as much of a problem with the rotation, right? Okay, they was playing in Europa League, which, to be honest, I think they could have played a strong squad against Spurs and played the same squad and turned over Forest, because Forest at Villa Park, it was always going to be, an uphill battle for Forest. But the lack of effort, like, they could not give a shit about that game, and the lack of foresight to realise that this is a team that are going to be competing for the same positions as you next season, the same players in a lot of instances. When it comes to Newcastle, they've taken one of their best players. And Newcastle, who were horrific up until they played West Ham, Newcastle were horrific. We rocked up to James's Park. They had the performance of their lives. They hadn't played that well in months. But as soon as we rock up, with relegation on the line, they turn into world beaters. And listen, my biggest gripes and my biggest blame for relegation will always be on David Sullivan, everyone who was involved in our transfer business for the last 3 years, I would say. Those managers, the technical directors, sporting directors, and the players. Right? That's the ultimate blame. So I'm not going to sit here and just put it all on Newcastle and Villa. But I just think it was incredibly short-sighted to have the opportunity to relegate one of these cartel big six and completely just do the opposite. Villa played the worst game they've played all season against Spurs. And Newcastle played one of the best games they've ever played all season against West Ham. Listen, we were a disgrace in that game, I will say that. But Newcastle stepped up. And what did it get them? Because let's be real, Villa would have won, they could have beat Spurs and still won the Europa League. Newcastle, it's just got them, another one of these cartels to compete with. We could have, and we take blame as well, we could have got rid of one of these cartel clubs. But we failed, Aston Villa failed, and Newcastle failed. And now you're reaping what you're sowing. So I can't feel sorry for Aston Villa and Newcastle, but I am outraged. Because we are seeing Spurs spend, I think they spent something like 300 million, a net spend of like 177 million after finishing 17th twice. We're seeing Aston Villa. Look at the players that they've sold. Morgan Rogers for 117 million. Yuri Tielemans, 35 million. Konza now, 1 million. Lucas Digne they've lost. Ollie Watkins is linked with a move to Saudi. Emi Martinez is still trying to go. And then you got Newcastle. Obviously, Anthony Gordon went to Barcelona for 69 million. Tonali went to Spurs, the club that they could have helped relegate. I mean, if you want to throw a game, that'd be the one to have thrown, the one against us, and we win that game. Spurs are in the championship, but they've had to sell Tonali to Spurs for 92 plus 5 mil. Bruno to Arsenal. Obviously, that went the season before. So they're in a really sticky situation now where there's a glass ceiling, and it's wrong. It's just, on a football fundamental merit is wrong, and Spurs fans will justify it and say, well, look at our stadium, look how much money we make. I have to ask, is this the sport of football or the sport of making money off the pitch? Because they have owners, Newcastle and Villa have owners that want to spend, and they're being hamstrung. Villa now have been playing European football consistently. They've just qualified for the Champions League for a second time, I think. Obviously, it was in Europa League last season, which they won. So they won the Europa League. And now they're having to sell all these players. And now listen, Villa and Newcastle haven't necessarily needed to sell all the players they've had to sell. But here's the problem. Once you have to sell one or two, it starts a chain reaction where these players think, we've lost Morgan Rogers, we've lost Isak, we've lost Tonali, that this club has a ceiling above its head. So I'm going to leave and go to a club that doesn't have that ceiling so I can win things. And I see people on talks saying, well, it's Konza, of course he'd want to go to Arsenal. Of course Tielemans will want to go to Man United. The chance of them forcing these moves massively drops when Villa can compete for wages and Villa can compete for the top trophies. If they know, and you're seeing, if you're a Konza and you're seeing, wow, Villa have kept Rodgers, they kept Tielemans, and they're bringing in top quality players, they're going, yeah, like, I'm here, I'm happy here, I'm loved, I've got a manager that I like, and this is a club that's going things. I can win the Premier League at this club. But they know it's not possible because they are working with a ceiling, a glass ceiling that cannot be cracked because of these bullshit rules. These rules that are supposedly there to stop clubs, getting into financial trouble for owners overspending what is being brought in and being put into trouble. And it's so easy. It's so easy to fix this. It's just get the ownership to put some money in a pot, right? Whatever that's controlled and overseen by the FA or whatever, that they can't touch. Whatever that amount is, you say to Aston Villa's owners, right, you got to stick, if you want to spend, you got to stick 300 mil in an account there that is Villa's, that is there in case of anything, going wrong, or if you leave and there's issues like that. Simple. Like, how laughable is it that Manchester United can be in nearly £1 billion worth of debt and spend and spend and spend and go again and go again and go again? The lack of repercussions for failure for these clubs, just because they happen to be good at the right time. Because let's be honest, like, Aston Villa were massively successful back in the 70s and early 80s, right? They were winning trophies and all that sort of stuff. But unfortunately for them, they didn't do that when Sky came about. Every club has their moments, has their errors. So for teams like Arsenal and Liverpool and Man United and then ultimately Chelsea, all right, we'll get to Chelsea as a separate issue, but a lot of these clubs were good at an era when the TV was there and the Premier League became a worldwide brand. The same with Chelsea and Man City. Their owners were allowed to pump money in and invest. And there were no rules. So by the time there were no rules, they were allowed to inflate the squads, invest season after season, and get them to where they are. Now the drawbridge is pulled up. The ladder's been pulled up behind them. Now look, I'm not saying necessarily I want to see a point where someone could just come in and, play Moneyball, just spend ridiculous amounts of money and buy the league, right? But there has to be a balance, because a lot of these clubs have already done it. There should be a cap, some sort of cap on spending that applies to everyone. Everyone has the same cap. Because the sport, it should be about like who is the best run football club on the pitch, off the pitch. Who's got the scouting, the management, the coaching. Not like who can throw the best concerts at their stadium and splash the most money and dine off of past reputations. This is the thing, like Aston Villa, and look, they've been a well-run club. They did go and have spent money in the past. But they went out and they got a good manager and they've been able to build over season and be up there, challenging for those positions, playing European football consistently on football basis without massively pumping in the money like a lot of these clubs have in the past. Arsenal and Spurs have been spending money like crazy, so have Chelsea this summer. Man City and Man United are behind, but you know they're going to come. So I just look at it and I just think, as fans of clubs that aren't these clubs, that we're in the Championship now, but we hope to be back in the Prem. It's concerning because we all look at Newcastle and Villa, right? And we want to be where they've been. We've been close. Look, we've won a European trophy. We played European football 3 seasons in a bounce. But we want to play Champions League football. We want to believe that we can eventually compete for the Premier League and win the Premier League. But we know that as long as these rules are in place, it's just not possible. Because no matter what players that you're able to get for your club, the players that these top clubs didn't have the foresight to sign. Chelsea didn't have the foresight to go and get Morgan Rogers before Aston Villa did. Arsenal didn't have the foresight to go and get Bruno Guimaraes before Newcastle did. But these clubs have done, but because of the glass ceiling, these players will eventually leave. And then they have to go again. And that is the issue. Is now Aston Villa have to rebuild. This should be a season where Villa can build on an amazing season for them. But they can't build on it now. They have to rebuild because their squad's been decimated. And it's just not fair. And it's not right. And it's anti-competitive. And honestly, this is part of the reason why I'm actually looking forward to this Championship season. Because the Premier League absolutely stinks. It's corrupt, it's not fit for purpose, and it's always built for the same 6 clubs. They had that, they decided, right, with Man City have entered, that's it now. Closed shop. So, look, there's a lot of decent fans, and when I say I don't feel sorry for them, I feel sorry for some of the fans, like the good fans that are those clubs, and the decent fans that they've all got. And that's who I really felt sorry for. But we should all be worried and we should all be causing a fuss over this. It's just shit for the league. Like, imagine now if Villa were able to keep hold of those players and strengthen, and then you're looking like, oh wow, can Villa win the Premier League? Can Newcastle go and now invest and break that bubble? But they don't want that. They hate it when those clubs are out of favour and not up there competing. I'm sorry, I don't care that they've been able to build up the brand and the fan base. Like I said, it was all timing. It's all timing for these clubs. They just happen to be good at the right time, and now they've got that fan base. But other clubs have to be allowed to get there to where these clubs are. They have to be allowed to be successful enough to grow their fan base and get to the point where they're sustainable. So, yeah, listen, the rules are bullshit. And we're going to see now another season where you're just going to see the status quo. And there's no possibility of seeing like a club like Brighton, even Brentford start to grow their clubs. Anytime they get success, people say it's the food chain. It's the food chain. Well, then what's the point? What are we all here for? If it's just if these clubs just constantly have to feed the same 6 clubs because of the food chain. It's bullshit. The food chain was established by Sky Sports. And Sky Sports and the FA keep it the same. So, yeah, look. Still shot themselves in the foot massively not sending Spurs down. But the rules are bullshit.